Hey everyone, welcome to Legacy Builders. My name is Bryan Delaney, and I'll be your host on this show as we dive into what it means to launch your expertise, scale your impact, and build your legacy using your knowledge, skills, expertise, and gifts God has given you. On this first episode, I'll share some of what I call my miracle story and how I was raised up seeing entrepreneurship all around me, and how even at a young age, I knew I was created to build and leave a lasting legacy to impact future generations. Hey, and welcome to Legacy Builders with Bryan Delaney. Today, I'm going to share my story about how I grew up thinking about entrepreneurship and how it took literally dying and coming back to life to waking up to God's plan and purpose for my life. So today I have one of my team members, Seth, with me today, and we're going to be diving into my journey as an entrepreneur, marketing on the internet.
Hey, Bryan, awesome to be here with you. I'm excited to dive more into your story because I think that the origin of your story lends so much to the work that you're doing today. And, you know, from an early age, you were thinking about entrepreneurship. So tell me, where did this begin for you, Bryan?
Yeah, so I would say as a young boy, I would always think about inventing things. And then I remember when I was really young, I started selling lemonade around my neighborhood. The problem was there really wasn't a high volume traffic place. So really the only people that are buying lemonade were people that are, in the neighborhood. From there, I had this idea. I was at the pharmacy, the local pharmacy down the road from my house with my mom one day. She was picking up something. And I saw these Jolly Ranchers. I'm like, you know what? I can buy a box of Jolly Ranchers and I can mark them up and sell them to everyone at school. And now I have a much larger audience to sell to. Everybody loves candy. I knew I love candy. I mean, I would eat these things all the time. And I was like, you know what? I can buy these for like 5 or 10 cents a pop. And they were the Jolly Rancher sticks. And then I could sell them for like 25 cents and people would buy them all day long. So I talked my mom into it. At first, she was not for it. She fought me. I was like, listen, I'm going to pay you back. I just need you to front my first box. And then I'm going to take the profit and I'll pay you back and I'll reinvest into my next box, my third box, my fourth box. Well, what happened was it was so successful before you knew it, a couple weeks in, and my entire backpack was full of boxes. In fact, I had boxes in my hands. I was carrying boxes in because so many people wanted these Jolly Ranchers, which you couldn't get anywhere. Like you couldn't get them out of the vending machine.
Right.
You couldn't get them anywhere. So I was the one carrying the sugar in and selling them to everyone at school.
How old were you at the time?
It was about fifth grade.
That's
so I
awesome.
was in, middle school. Yeah.
That's awesome. My first tree house was funded by buying necklaces at the dollar store and selling them for $7 a pop. So there's something great about that age. Yeah. Did you see this was your dad an entrepreneur? Were there people in your family that kind of got you thinking in that way? Because most fifth graders aren't thinking like that.
Yeah. So I was born and raised in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, which is, as I say, the land of the horse and buggies out in, rural country of Pennsylvania, about an hour outside of Philadelphia. And my grandfather was an inventor and my dad was an entrepreneur. So growing up, I spent a lot of time with my great-grandfather. And so I would go fishing with him all the time when I was a kid. I learned how to fish at a really young age. I was going out on charters and doing competitions with him, and it was a ton of fun. But he was an inventor, and he invented a fishing contraption. That's a whole nother story for another time. But I saw him invent that, and I thought that was really cool. And then my dad was an entrepreneur from the moment I was born. My dad was an entrepreneur. My dad happened to get pulled into entrepreneurship. He was actually an employee for most of his life up until the point when I was born. And then he was in his 30s at the time. And his brother started a company and said, hey, I need help. And so my dad came over and helped him to run that business. And so I grew up around inventors, entrepreneurs. That was really the only entrepreneurs, though, that were in my family. Everyone else was an employee. Everyone else worked a job. Right. It was really my dad. And I love my dad. I mean, I was according to my mom's words, I was obsessed with my dad. Like I just, I love being around him. I love hanging out with him. We would do all types of fun stuff together. And so I was really influenced by him a lot, definitely as a little kid.
I think when we're kids, we don't often think like we love our parents. We love being around them, but we're not really thinking about like the lessons we're picking up from them. Now looking back as an adult, are there some things that you now see like, oh man, I learned this from just watching my dad be an entrepreneur or watching, my great grandfather be an inventor? Like what are some of the things that you learned from your family in that regard?
Yeah. So from my grandfather, I learned, because his deal went sideways actually. So when I was a little kid, I didn't really understand what was going on, but my grandfather invented this contraption and he partnered with an attorney, to bring it to the world. And what happened was the attorney basically screwed him over, took the patent, sold the patent for like $3 million or something. And my grandfather got left in the dust. So that early on was my whole family was like, you need to get contracts, like make sure you have agreements that are written in your favor. And that was a big lesson. I'll get into, how I had to learn that lesson myself later in life. But I heard that we went through that as a family, and that was terrible, right? I mean, seeing your grandfather create something and then get the rug pulled out from under him by the attorney that he hired to actually write the contract was terrible. Mm-hmm. My dad, I got to see him running trade shows. So he ran trade shows around the country, California, Atlanta, Chicago, New Jersey. So he ran trade shows in the supply chain technology industry, and he would bring together the buyers and sellers in that industry. And so as a kid, being in that environment, I was able to go to shows with my dad and I was able to be a part of them, which was cool. Like I would just do stuff for fun, right? I would help him set up booths or I'd run errands. I always thought that was a lot of fun being involved in my dad's business.
Yeah.
And then I got to see him manage a team. So he had a team of about 10 people. A lot of them were family members, cousins and, a lot of them there were my cousins, my aunts, like that kind of thing. They were working in the business. And then, so I got to see my dad managing employees and what that environment looked like. Like his office was about 30 minutes down the road. So I would drive to work with my dad. And so I got to see behind the scenes of how he operated the business. Cause my dad was the CEO. His brother was the inventor, founder. My dad was really the one running the ship. I mean, he was the one, leading the business. And then I got to see him solve problems. I mean, there was constantly something that came up. One of the biggest things that my dad would always say when making a big decision was, we got to sleep on it. So I would always remember he would always have all these decisions that he had to make. A lot of times he was solving problems, but then there would be like this big decision. Like I remember my dad got offered like 180 grand for a domain name. And it was like the primary domain name of his business. So his brother was attached to that name because his brother created the name. My dad wasn't attached. My dad was like, hey, like let's sell that thing. It's 180 grand. Like, let's sell that and we'll just go buy another domain name. Right. But his brother didn't want to sell it. So his brother ended up not selling that domain name, which was kind of silly looking back. Like, a $10 domain name for 180 grand. That's a pretty good investment. Right.
Right.
And then I also got to see my dad, which was really cool just because I spent so much time in that business and being around because it was fun for me. I got to see him innovate ad solutions. So one of the things my dad invented or kind of innovated was the one-page mailer. Prior to that, people were putting mail in envelopes and then shipping them out, and it would cost like whatever it would cost. Well, my dad figured out how about we get the postage down, because they were sending out mailers of like, 50, 100,000 pieces at a time. They're sending them out. And so they're like, oh, if we can get this down to one page and one basically stamp, it'll drop the cost down significantly. And the print company and the company that was doing all the printing, basically they'd like, yeah, we've never seen this before. So it was really cool to be in my dad's business from that perspective, even though I was, a teenager. Right. I was able to see stuff like that.
Yeah. And I can say, I can imagine even just being at a trade show. Like, I feel like a trade show is such a good example of like so many elements of what like the American business is built off of. Like, you have to figure out, like, there's people walking by, you have to be able to draw them in. Like, is your booth attractive? Do you have a headline? You know, then, okay, cool. Now you have to talk to people. Like, are you going to be able to explain to them with clarity? You have 15 seconds. There's all these trade show, other booths around. So I feel like I can imagine how much you would learn being a teenager in like a trade show environment and seeing like, how does this work?
Yeah. Well, what I thought was really cool, like all those things you said are spot on. What I thought was cool is that literally, some of these guys would come. First of all, some of these companies became billion-dollar brands, and they attributed their success to my dad's show, which was awesome. Looking back, I would have found a way to get a percentage of that.
Yeah.
Obviously, even if it was a fraction of a percent, it would be millions of dollars. But I remember literally this happened where my dad would do like a multi-day show. So it'd be like a 4-day show, right? And there was a guy who came, set up his booth, stayed for a day, and then literally packed up and left. He was like, yeah, I got so much business, like I can't take anymore. And he like he's like, I'll be back next year, but I'm done. And he like packed his bags and left. So the show was so successful of bringing people together, making those connections happen, that people would just come for a day and leave.
Yeah, that's wild. Cool. Yeah, amazing. Amazing lessons learned from that kind of an environment. So you're learning these things as a teenager. I feel like now the conversation of college is much more like fluid and flexible. And there's a lot of people that understand like maybe college is a good option. Maybe it's not the best option, but like, what was your approach as you started thinking about college and like what you were going to do once you graduated school?
Yeah. So for me, everybody at that time, everybody went to college. It was like just a thing that everybody did. Right. I mean, trade schools they were kind of frowned upon, actually. At least in my community, everyone was like, everybody goes to college. That's just like what everybody does. And they push that narrative on everyone. So coming out of high school, I applied to a bunch of schools. I got accepted to pretty much every single school I applied for. And I just knew that was just the evolution of school, right? Like you go to high school, you go to middle school, you go to high school, you go to college. And so coming out of high school, actually I graduated from Berks Christian School. Most of my career, I actually went to public school, went to Twin Valley, which is in Morgantown, Pennsylvania. My last year of high school, I transferred to Berks Christian School. And that's a whole story that I go into more in depth in my book. But from there, I went to Slippery Rock University. And Slippery Rock University is over in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
What were you going to major in?
I went in, believe it or not, to Slippery Rock University for marine biology. That was my first endeavor. I loved being on the ocean. Like I love being in the water. I loved exploring the unknown of the ocean. Right. And I knew that we haven't really, truly explored the oceans fully. And so for me, I had a fascination with exploring the unknown, and then also a fascination with, the ocean, all that's down there. And I love the water. So I was like, okay, let me see if this is something I'm interested in and go down that path. What happened though is like after my first year of going down that path, first of all, there wasn't a lot of marine biology. It was a lot of sciences. So there was a lot of unrelated topics, which I'm like, okay, well, like how does this relate to getting a job in marine biology? I'm not studying anything that has to do with marine biology. Yeah. I was studying like general electives, music, all these random things that they were just saying, oh, you have to get this because this is part of the college experience. I go, well, it has nothing to do with marine biology. So that was fascinating to me. And then I switched to my second year going at Slippery Rock University. I switched to business, just a general business studies. And I started with business management. So I figured, you know what, like push comes to shove, I can always use business, right? Mm-hmm. Because I knew, seeing the lifestyle my dad had, like as a family, we weren't wealthy, but we were well off. My dad made probably, $350,000 a year. We were able to travel, take a couple weeks off vacation in the summers. Like we had a good life. Like we pretty much had what we wanted. We didn't fly privately. Like, we weren't wealthy, but we were doing better than most in our community. So for me, growing up, being a part of that experience in that environment, I said, a business, I can do so much with that. And that's why I shifted and pivoted to business at that time.
Yeah. So, your college experience ended up being a bit of like a wake up call and a pivotal experience, but maybe not in the way that you expected. Like, what did you maybe expect to get out of college? And then talk to me about like what that first year or two in college, kind of what that experience ended up leading you into.
Yeah. So first year of college was, awkward, right? I mean, you go from having your own room at home, with your parents, and my brother and sister, to going to living in a dorm room with another dude, right? So that you don't know, right? So I went, had a new roommate. I'm in a super tiny room, practically bunk beds, living with a new dude that you just met. So that was weird. Like, that's always uncomfortable. My second year, though, after the first year, so I had a couple people from high school that I knew. I wasn't really close with them in high school, but now all of a sudden I'm getting to know them more because they were the ones I knew. Like, at least I had some familiarity with high school, right? And so I had two people from high school that went to Slippery Rock University as well. And so I really, we kind of hung together, and I started working out with the one guy, and he was a part of a fraternity. So I would go and hang out with them on the weekends and do fun stuff with those guys. The second year coming in, all of the guys were like, "Hey, you should join the fraternity. We'd love to have you a part of the fraternity." And the fraternity was more, it wasn't, most people think fraternities, think party, just like having a wild time. And they did that, but they were the top fraternity when it came to athletics, academics. They were, they weren't the party fraternity, but they partied. They still had fun. They still, had a good time, but they also were really competitive athletically, and intellectually as well. So they talked me into it. I mean, that's really what it boiled down to. I was like, you know what? I'm already hanging out with these guys already. I wanted to do something. Quite frankly, I wanted to do something because I was bored. I was like, I should either get involved in student government or I should join the fraternity. And the fraternity sounded like more fun. So I went down that path.
Yeah. What was that experience like for you?
It was challenging. Pledging a fraternity was like a full-time job outside of school. I mean, it's so demanding. So I found myself going from my first year of having a ton of free time, being able to go to the gym, being able to just really kick it and relax, to going to school now. And on top of that, I also have all of these extracurricular activities with the fraternity life. And so all of a sudden I found myself, I was super booked, busy. I didn't have a free moment to myself. And it was demanding. I mean, we're one moment, where we have to memorize this, this pledge. We have to memorize this, that, and the next thing. I mean, tons of stuff we had to memorize. On top of that, we had to basically cater to the fraternity brothers, right? So we're cleaning this guy's house, or we're doing chores for this guy. So it was an interesting experience. From what I remember, it was fun, but it was busy and it was demanding. And
so going into college, what were you maybe expecting to get out of it? And then I know that first year or two there were some pretty pivotal experiences that marked you forever and really changed your life. So tell me a little bit more about what ended up happening in that first year or two of college for you.
Yeah. So definitely an interesting experience. Being in college and then joining the fraternity was more than I bargained for sure. First year was pretty easy, pretty calm. I had a lot of extra time. Second year, though, joining a fraternity, it's like basically having a full-time job outside of going to school. My grades were suffering. I spent way too much time and energy focused on the fraternity life and all the things that you have to do to really earn your way into it, right? I mean, they put you through a process where they make it hard and challenging, and they want to, put you under pressure to see if you're fit to be able to be in the fraternity.
Right.
And some people don't make it. I mean, some people just bail, right? I mean, and usually that's in the beginning, but you could go the whole semester and last minute they could be like, yeah, you're not a good fit. And they kick you out. So you always have that fear. For me, I went all the way through it. Big Brother night came, which is usually that moment, which is really intense, where they're, seeing what you're made of before they before they introduce you to your big brother is what they call it.
How long had you been like going through kind of their like process before ideally you'd kind of like almost graduate? Is this like a year-long process?
It's a whole semester. No, okay. It's a whole semester. So 4 months. You start that year, and then like within the first 2 weeks of being on campus, you're going through that introduction process, and then you start the journey.
Yeah. So I imagine you were looking forward to this Big Brother night.
Oh, for sure. We were all looking forward to it. We knew it was going to be tough. We knew after Big Brother night typically comes Hell Week. So that would be like another really intense week that's like the last push over the edge. But we knew Big Brother night was going to be monumental as well, because there's like a ceremony that's attached to it. And, so where I found myself at that moment was, we went to one of our, the elders. In the fraternity life, you have elders, so you have parents that are part of the fraternity. They they were a brother when they went through school, and then they, obviously graduated school and went off to get a career, and they're still plugged in. Well, in our case, the guy who led the bookstore, he was the head bookstore manager for Slippery Rock University. He had a house that was on campus. And so we went to his house, and that's where Big Brother night started. And it was basically, hell going through, practically hell to then get indoctrinated. From there, it really went downhill pretty quickly because we went through this really emotionally battering experience, almost like trying to, more verbal than it was physical, but it was very dark. And so, you're going into a garage with candles. They're playing, heavy metal. Then one person comes into the house at a time. You go, up the house. You go down the basement. Everything's pitch dark. And then you have the brothers that are just, screaming, yelling at you, calling you profane names. Quite frankly, it's a blur at this point. I mean, we're, almost 2 decades from that experience now at this point. So a lot of that's a blur, but let's just put it this way. I was one of the last pledges to come in. And by the time that I'd gotten in there, other brothers were already gone through the process and in a waiting or holding period. And I came in and I was guarded. I kind of guarded myself. Not, mind you, I already knew a lot of these brothers already. And they were like, oh yeah, we're going to take it easy on you. So I already knew them, and I had kind of my guard up. But there was other pledges that were literally crying. They were like, in tears. They're crying. You could hear them like sobbing from that experience. So it was a pretty intense experience. And then all of a sudden they flip the light on, and then they're celebrating, like, congratulations. And it was really weird. You go from like this really dark moment of hate, anger, and all of that negative emotion to like ecstatic, joyful, excited. It was a real weird shift. And then they're busting out bottles of alcohol, and you're meeting your big brother for the first time. And then from there, we went to another house, started drinking. I only lasted probably about an hour into that experience that I remember. Then I blacked out. And then after that, I woke up in the hospital the next morning with 3 doctors literally rushing to my bedside as they were singing, he's alive, 3 times. And for me, it was just all white. The doctors were even wearing, white gowns. And everything was just bright. And I had no clue where I was.
Wow.
The doctor, he leaned over to my bedside and he said, do you know where I'm at? You are. And I said, I don't know. Where am I at? I thought I was at the Slippery Rock Medical Center. And he's like, no, we're at the Grove City Hospital. It's about 15 miles away. And he said, you came in last night He said, we didn't think you were going to live. I called your parents, said you're going to either die or be brain dead for life. He's like, in my 30 years of being a doctor, I've never seen anyone with your severe of a condition live, yet alone be able to comprehend what I'm saying. So the fact that you can actually understand what I'm saying right now is a miracle. He goes, all I can say is God must have a plan and purpose for your life. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't understand how you could have come out of this. Now, mind you, my blood alcohol level was 0.39. I was one shot from death, literally. I didn't throw anything up. They had to pump my stomach, and I woke up with a catheter in me, which is never a fun experience. And I was still foggy naturally, right? I mean, think about when you drink and wake up the next day after you had a little bit too much to drink. I had about a fifth of vodka in less than 30 minutes. That's where I was at that moment. And so it was really a surreal experience, being there. It was one of those moments that really makes you stop and think about your life. And think about like how grateful I am to even be able to comprehend, to be able to speak, to be able to hear, to really coming back to life and everything being okay, right? I mean, to me in this moment, I was like, okay, I was a close call, right? I survived. I'm still here. I didn't really fully understand the depth of what I'd went through.
Right.
I'm grateful because after that experience, I found out that, my pledge master was, he knew something was wrong, and he was studying a background in medical. And because of his studies in that field, he's like, something's really wrong. And some of the brothers actually said, hey, we should just drop Delaney off at his dorm or his house. And he was like, oh, no, like we have to drop him off at the medical center. Now think about this for a second. I was not even 21 yet. So they now have a minor who's completely wasted, super drunk. For them, it's like a liability. They don't want to get charged for something. So they just dumped me off and then kind of like knocked the door and ran. And now all of a sudden the medical center, I couldn't even walk. I mean, I was basically on my face on the ground. And, but from that experience, my family drove across the state. When my parents got the call that night before, the doctor had said, your son's probably going to die, be brain dead for life. My parents immediately prayed, and they prayed for that God would have his hand of protection on me. And they said that they had felt a peace about it all. And so they drove across the state. It's about 5.5 hour drive. They drove across the state. And then that morning I woke up at about 8:30 in the morning. And then from there, after I eventually got out of the hospital in the afternoon, my dad and I drove back to campus, and there was this little tiny hole in the wall church that said, God has a plan and purpose for your life. And it was really ironic, right? I mean, I just heard that from the doctor who'd been a doctor for more than 30 years, who thought I was going to die. And then I'm driving back to campus, and this little tiny hole in the wall church, tiny church, looks like it couldn't even fit more than 20, 30 people in this thing. And it says, God has a plan and purpose for your life. Well, when I saw that sign, my dad said, I think this is a sign. This sign's for you, Bryan. I think that you really need to contemplate, why God brought you back, why God spared your life, why God saved you, and what that purpose is. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't at the right place. I was around the wrong people who didn't share the same values as I have. None of those people at that time were seeking out God's plan and purpose. They were going to college. They were having fun. They were living it up. And the last thing that was on their mind was, what's God's plan for my life? So I knew I had to make a shift. I knew I had to transfer. I knew I had to get out of that environment. And I'd already done it before, right? I mean, when I was in high school, growing up, I went to public school all the way through high school. And then my last year, I went to a Christian high school.
Right.
And that was a radical difference. The level of education at a public school compared to a private school was starkly different. So I knew that it was going to be different. I wasn't sure how different it was going to be. But I knew it was going to be different.
And it sounds like you started thinking about purpose, what God's purpose was for your life a little bit different here. And in the next episode and in future episodes, we'll talk more about that journey, but give me kind of a quick synopsis of like what was starting to run through your mind as you looked at like, what is your life purpose?
Yeah. So at the time I knew I needed to seek God. I needed to pray. I needed to read the scripture. I was, when I was 16, that's when I found God. And that's a whole nother story. So at this point I'm 20, right? And I knew I needed to get into a different environment. So at that time I said, you know what? I need to surround myself with Christians. I need to study and go deep into the word. So what I did was I said, okay, I'm going from business management, right, to let's go into pastoral studies. I knew I didn't want to be a pastor and be stuck in one building, but I knew that I wanted to go deeper in God's truth and God's word. And so I figured, if I immerse myself into the things of God, then God will lead me to discovering my purpose.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And eventually that's what happened. But I really had no clarity. It was, I was like in the tunnel and I couldn't see the end of the light, the light at the end of the tunnel. I was just in this dark place of really not knowing, where God wanted me to go next. But I knew that I needed to shift the people that I was around and what I was actually spending my time studying. I knew that much. That's all I knew at the time.
Yeah.
And that's when I then shifted from Slippery Rock University to Clearwater Christian College. And I went there because I applied to, about a handful of different Christian colleges around the country, and I got approved every single one of them. But Clearwater was a place where I had 3 confirmations from other people that it was a great place to go. And one of the things I prayed about at that time was, God, I want you to confirm and lead me and to where you want me to be. And literally all roads were leading to Clearwater. So after the third person said, oh, Clearwater is an amazing place, I've heard great things about it, then that was my confirmation that I needed. Okay, God, this is where you want me to go. You're confirming where I should make my next move through different people in my experience. Mm-hmm. So random people. These weren't people that I knew. These were random people that I stumbled across that all said Clearwater is where I recommend. And then then that's where I found myself going. I found myself, jumping on a plane and landing in Tampa and driving down to Clearwater.
That's awesome. Which is close to where you are today.
That's correct. Yep.
That's awesome. Well, this has been great. And if you're listening or watching, make sure you watch our future episodes, because we're going to dive more into, what did God begin to speak to you? What was this journey of like really finding out your purpose, and really how did you go from, almost dying to impacting more than 1 billion people with the work that you've been doing. So Bryan, thanks for being willing to jump into your story.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Legacy Builders. Make sure you tune into the next episode where I share about the time when I died and was brought back to life, which was a massive wake-up call that led to me discovering my soul's purpose in life and business. Now, if you would like to tap into the exploding self-education industry that's expected to grow to $1 billion a day, I would suggest checking out www.launchexpertise.com. That's launchexpertise.com, where you can grab a copy of my free book, The Entrepreneur Evangelist. You can join 33 days of coaching with me, where you'll learn how to launch your expertise online, scale your impact, and build your legacy. Or you can hire my team and I, where you can take the fastest path by using your expertise and combining it with ours, so we can help you with regards to marketing, advertising, and selling online. Again, that's launchexpertise.com.